Hey everyone, today I'm going to be doing a complete level 2 spells ranking in Baldur's Gate 3, going from number 42 all the way up to number 1, and I will put them all into a tier on a tier list. We're going to go through each spell pretty quickly because I have already gone over all of them in depth in their own video. A few quick things when ranking: I am assuming that you're not long resting dozens of times per act. If you long rest all the time, some of the bonus action or out of combat spells might be better for you than they are in this ranking, but most spells should be similarly ranked. I'm also assuming that you're not camp casting, and I put lower value on pre-casting. Finally, we're talking about these spells as if you're casting them using a spell slot, not an item or a scroll. Alright, without further ado, let's begin with the F tier spells. F tier spells are spells that are useless, incredibly niche, or entirely outclassed. The first spell on our list, the shameful number 42, the worst level 2 spell in the game, is Enthrall. Enthrall, what it does is it reduces an enemy's vision cone, which is not very useful. What it can be used for is to steal. You can use Enthrall to interrupt NPCs who might be trying to accuse you of stealing, but that's it. There's no combat use. You are going to be hard-pressed to find a time where you would ever want to use this spell in combat. And on top of that, using it to steal, it can do it, but there are other ways to steal that don't cost you a level 2 spell slot, so why would you ever want to? Enthrall is just such a weak spell, you should not really cast this in your playthroughs. It is the worst level 2 spell in the game. Next up, we have Phantasmal Force. In isolation, I don't know if this is actually the second worst level 2 spell in the game, but it is really terrible when you compare it to other damaging options to the point where you should never cast this. This spell deals 1d6 damage per turn. You heard me right, 1d6. That is pitiful. Cantrips, most of them, deal more than that at level 1, and they don't cost you a spell slot. On top of that, to deal your pitiful 1d6, this costs you your concentration, which is ridiculous. I would never cast this if it didn't cost concentration, but it does. And on top of that, I just need to reiterate, this is abysmal damage. We're dealing less damage than a Ray of Frost without the bonus secondary effect, right? It is so bad. The nifty thing about this spell is that you can change its damage type. So you can, with some careful play, double the damage of this spell. If you hit an enemy with Phantasmal Force and then a damage type that they're weak to, the Phantasmal Force will turn into that damage type and deal double damage. But even then, let's just assume the best case scenario. You have double damage from enemies being vulnerable, and you roll a 6 on the die. Your absolute maximum damage is 12. I would not spend my concentration and spell slot on this spell. Even in the absolute best case scenario, it is that weak, and you can't even upcast it. The damage is stuck that low. It does have one other nice thing going for it. It's an intelligence save. This is one of the better save types because some enemies will not be very resistant to it, so it is more likely to hit, but more likely to hit your terrible spell doesn't really matter. Next up, at number 40, we have Barkskin. Barkskin grants 16 AC to the target. 16 AC isn't high enough. Your party should all have 16 AC fairly easily. Your marshals will get it with their armor and their dexterity bonus, and your mages will usually get it with mage armor plus their dexterity. So already, this spell doesn't really have a place because you don't need it. On top of that, it costs your concentration, so you can't really use this like a day-long buff. You can't afford to cast this on a character for a day and then entirely lose their concentration slot for the whole adventuring day. It's really not worth it, ever. Even if it was a higher AC, it might actually give you a buff, but the cost is still too high. But as is, you have such a high cost for something that isn't even a buff in most cases. On the plus side, you can cast this spell on NPCs and summons, and they might actually get an AC bonus, right? Your party probably won't, but if you cast it on a random NPC that you need to protect or one of your summoned creatures, they will get a buff from it. The buff isn't that great, right? It's probably going to be a few AC points, and it's going to cost your concentration, and it's going to be on one of the weaker targets of an NPC or a summon, right? Your party's the ones who are going to be doing most of the work. So even though you're able to buff up NPCs and summons, it doesn't really matter as much. It can also be used in wild shape, so druids can cast it on themselves and then turn into a wild shape, and they might get an AC bonus. The issue here is that the best wild shapes already have 16 AC, so you really would only get value on one of the weaker wild shapes, and it would still be a weaker wild shape, so it doesn't really matter. You're just buffing up something weak to still be suboptimal. This spell is really rough to cast, and I would not recommend it. Next up, we have number 39, Knock. Knock can be used to unlock a door. This has practically no combat uses. Yeah, that's it. It has no combat uses. On top of that, what it replaces, lockpicking, isn't something you need to replace because lockpicking can be retried as many times as you need. So whenever you fail a lockpicking check, as long as you have thieves' tools, which are abundant and cheap to buy, you can just try again. So from an optimization standpoint, you should never need to spend a spell slot on lockpicking. It does have a real world bonus of saving my patience, which is valuable, but from an optimization point, doesn't really matter. The reason it's not at the very bottom is that it can be used to avoid some encounters. For example, some of the trials in the Gauntlet of Shar, you can use Knock to open a door and avoid needing to get Umbral Gems. This is helpful, but by skipping encounters this way, you miss out on XP, so it's often a suboptimal choice. Next up, we have number 38, Ray of Enfeeblement. Ray of Enfeeblement is a debuff spell that reduces weapon damage from the target. It is also uniquely an attack roll. Most debuff spells are a saving throw, and an attack roll is unique. It can let you bypass some high saving throws, and you can get advantage on it. Unfortunately, after the first turn, it's no longer an attack roll. It turns into a con save, and con saves are very weak. Enemies, especially who have high weapon damage, will likely have very high con saves, so they're going to pass this very quickly. And on top of that, reducing weapon damage is nice, but it's not a very strong debuff. The reason is, you don't actually impede what an enemy can do. They have all their movement, they have all their action economy, they can do whatever they want to do, it just might be a little bit weaker. On top of that, this spell is a concentration spell, which is just kind of ridiculous. This spell really needs to not be concentration for it to be good, so it really holds it back. This spell is certainly going to be an F tier as well. Next up, we have Protection from Poison. This is a spell that gives you resistance to poison damage, which is useful in some encounters, for example, the phase spiders or Auntie Ethel. And it also gives you advantage against the poisoned condition on saving throws. This is also nice because becoming poisoned gives you disadvantage on attack rolls, so it's nice to be able to get advantage on it. The issue is, the spell just rarely comes up. There are a handful of encounters in the entire game that deal significant poison damage. On top of the two I mentioned, there's Mystic Carrion and Balthazar, and both of those deal their damage with Cloud Kill. And the thing about Cloud Kill is that elixirs, the elixir of poison resistance, and Hero's Feast make you immune to Cloud Kill. This spell does not. So it's really outclassed by elixirs because the elixir will give you resistance to poison damage, it will give you immunity to the poisoned condition, and immunity to Cloud Kill. So it's just straight up better than this spell. Hero's Feast is also a late game option that you're going to want to cast anyways, that will give you immunity to Cloud Kill and the poisoned condition. Resistance to poison damage is nice, but it's rarely going to come up, and that's why this spell is so low ranked. And it's never needed. To do these encounters, you never need resistance to poison damage. It's nice to have, but it's not even really a game changer, unless you cast it on like your whole party, but at that point you're losing 4 spell slots, so it's really not worth it. Next up, we have number 36, See Invisibility. This is pretty similar to Protection from Poison in that it is like a day-long buff spell that you use for specific encounters. The encounters you use See Invisibility for are the Ghosts, the Ballists, and Antiethel. The thing is, See Invisibility is really important for those fights, so that's why it's higher than Protection from Poison, but it's still very easy to get from other means. You can get See Invisibility from Volo for free, well, if you're willing to give up an eyeball. You can get it from elixirs, and making enemies lose their invisibility is quite easy. Fairy Fire is a level 1 spell with a big AoE. Create Water, again, a level 1 spell that's AoE. Just water bottles, you can get enemies wet and they'll lose their invisibility. You never need to cast the See Invisibility spell, even though it is in theory useful in, again, only a handful of encounters. You just should never need to cast this spell. Next up, number 35 is Branding Smite. Branding Smite is a smite spell that deals 2d6 radiant damage and prevents enemies from turning invisible. This simply does less damage than Divine Smite. A lot less damage. At level 1, Divine Smite does 2d8 or 3d8. At level 2, it does 3d8 with the potential for 48 damage. 3d8 versus 2d6. I know which one I'm choosing. I'm never casting Branding Smite. On top of that, it costs an additional bonus action, which is ridiculous, and the side effect is incredibly niche and will almost never come up. The reason this isn't near the bottom is that this spell can be used on top of Divine Smite on the same attack. If you really want to load up one attack, you can use smite spells with Divine Smite if you use Divine Smite as a reaction. Now, if I was to do that, I would probably use Thunderous Smite, which is a level 1 spell and does thunder damage with an additional effect. Or maybe I would use Searing Smite, probably not, that one's also terrible, but it does 2d6 fire damage at level 1 plus 1d6 per turn, so it does more damage at level 1. But maybe there's a chance I specifically want to do radiant damage on both the Smite and the Divine Smite, so I would use Branding Smite and then use Divine Smite as a reaction. This is pretty rarely going to come up, but if you really need to pump damage on one turn, radiant damage is the best damage type of the Smite spells, so it could come up. It is still F tier, but that's why it's not way at the bottom. Next up is Dark Vision. The issue with Dark Vision is that most races inherently have the trait Dark Vision, so you never need the spell. Most of your companions have it, but some don't. The humans, Gale and Will, don't have it, as well as Lae'zel. And the other main issue, though, even if you do need Dark Vision on some of your characters, light sources are really easy to come by. There are weapons, cantrips, just environmental features that light up areas to the point where most of the time you're never going to have any downsides from not having Dark Vision. Where the spell could come in, though, is if you're using a build such as a Shadow Monk or a Shadow Blade build where you specifically want to make sure there are no light sources around. Shadow Blade, you can get advantage on your attacks if you keep everything lightly or heavily obscured. Shadow Monks can use their teleport freely. There could be cases where you have a custom character or one of your companions that doesn't have Dark Vision, and you don't want to use one of the many free light sources. And that's when the spell might come in. This is incredibly niche, and it is still in F tier, but it could come up. Next up, that's all we've got for the F tier spells, so let's move on to D tier. These are spells that are weak, very niche, or mostly outclassed. They're going to be generally bad spells, but they might have a specific case where they're good. Their effect might be weak but not useless, or they might actually be decent options but are largely outclassed. First up, we have Detect Thoughts at number 33. Detect Thoughts, the big thing about it is that it is a ritual concentration spell. There are some effects and equipment in the game that activate based on concentration, so having a free way to get it is nice. There are some cantrips that do this, But Detect Thoughts, being a ritual spell, works very similarly. And you might have a limited number of cantrips that you're willing to learn, and you need them for other things. So this could come into play. The intended use for Detect Thoughts is to open up some dialogue options, and that is nice. It's not super impactful, but it's nice to have, and it opens up some roleplay choices. The big reason it's so low is that there are just no intended combat uses. It does find its niche as being a free way to get concentration, but the way it was built, it was not meant to be used in combat at all. And that's why it's very low D tier. And also, on the dialogue side, there are very limited choices, right? It's only there if the developers built in a chance to use it. And often the dialogue choices are actually not better than any of your other options. Next up, and we're going to have a run here of similar colored spells, we have Gust of Wind at number 32. Gust of Wind pushes enemies back, and that means you can use it to insta-kill enemies, and instantly it's not F tier. A spell that can insta-kill is nice. This one is hard to use, but that is something to write home about. If you can use a level 2 spell slot to kill something, it can't be terrible. It is also a strength save, which is a decent type. There are going to be some enemies, perhaps ranged marshals or spellcasters, that have very low strength saves, so if you get a chance to hit them with this, it will be fairly reliable. The issue with this, and the reason that it is so low ranking, even though it can insta-kill, is that, for one, the shape is very weird to use. Gust of Wind is a long, narrow line, and it doesn't push enemies very far, so in practice, it's quite hard to actually insta-kill enemies by pushing them into chasms. And at the end of the day, it's also competing with Thunderwave, which is a level 1 spell that pushes enemies 10 feet further. So in almost any case where you can kill with Gust of Wind, Thunderwave could do it, and in many cases where Gust of Wind can't kill enemies, Thunderwave can. So it's really outclassed, and that's part of the reason why it's so low. It also has an off-balance added effect, but that doesn't really matter. So it really only pushes enemies with no bonus effect. Next up, at number 31, we have Arcane Lock. Arcane Lock, it's got two uses. You can use it on a door to lock enemies out of an encounter. So you can lure some enemies through a door, lock it, and then the other enemies won't be able to fight. And you can also use it to protect your party. You can move your entire party through a door, lock it, and then protect yourself from enemies. This is decent in theory, but it is so hard to cast. There are very, very few arenas where you can actually cast this. Finding a door in the middle of a fight that you can also cast this on safely is rough. And it is a melee range spell, so your spellcaster needs to be kind of in the thick of it to cast the spell and close the door. Creative players might be able to find good uses for this, but it is very difficult, and it feels like the game is not built for this spell. Let's move on now to number 30. The next damaging spell of the list, Melf's Acid Arrow. So the nice thing about this one is that it does d4 damage dice, which makes it reliable, and it can crit because it's an attack roll. So Melf's Acid Arrow can actually do a decent amount of damage. And on top of that, it creates an acid surface, so it has a nice added effect. The issue is, for one, part of the damage is delayed. So when you cast a damaging spell, typically you want to kill something. So delaying your damage is not ideal. It damages at the end of the enemy's next turn. And it's just generally outclassed. It does decent damage, but there are so many good damaging options at level 2 that Melf's Acid Arrow just falls behind. The closest comparison I could make is to Scorching Ray, which is also a wizard spell, and it does much more damage, is more reliable, and has better item synergy. Why would I ever want to cast Melf's Acid Arrow when I could cast Scorching Ray? And there are plenty of other damaging options that are better than it as well. Next up, this is the only spell that I have moved since my report card series. I originally had it in F tier, but I think D tier is more appropriate. We have Flameblade. I still think this doesn't hold up to other damaging options, like the Druid's Moonbeam, but people in the comments brought up item interactions and offhand attackings as some missed points in my video that I do think are valid and bump the spell up a bit. The issue with this spell, and the reason I don't like it at all, is it's basically a melee damaging spell that does 3d6 damage. This is terrible. I need to use my bonus action to then use my action to do 3d6 damage on a spell? Why would I ever do this over Moonbeam? Why would I do it over most damaging spells? It's really rough. And Druids also get Shillelagh, which is a free buffing spell for their melee attacks. And it also lets them hold on to whatever they're already holding so they can get the bonuses of their quarterstaff. This spell is cool, but it's just not very good. It can be used in the offhand, which is a good use case, because you can now get 3d6 fire damage as a bonus action each turn, which is good. You do need to either precast this, or you can't use it on the first turn because you need to use your bonus action to cast the spell, but that is a good use case. It also has good item interactions, like with the Hat of Fire Acuity. Next up, we have Lesser Restoration. Lesser Restoration is a spell you can use to get rid of a disease, blind, paralysis, or poison. And the big thing about this is that paralysis is a very good condition to remove. Paralysis completely incapacitates your allies, and you can use this to get rid of it, which is nice. It's also an easy spell to just have prepared. You can carry around a Lesser Restoration and only cast it when you need it. The thing is, when you need it is almost never. This is very rarely going to come up. Most of the conditions, disease, poison, and blind, are not that bad, and you don't want to use a spell slot to cure them. And paralysis is very rare. It only comes up in a handful of encounters. On top of that, this is a reactive spell. You can only use it after someone gets paralyzed, which means some of the damage will probably already be done, and you need to use an action reactively to get rid of it. Next up, we have number 27, Magic Weapon. Magic Weapon is a good spell if you can keep it up for a long time. The more attacks you make, the more value you get out of the spell. Every attack you hit with a weapon buffed by Magic Weapon will deal 1 extra damage. And over time, that will add up. It doesn't sound like a lot, and it's really not for just each individual attack. But if you can keep it up for a long time, get a lot of attacks off, maybe with some good classes that hit many targets, then you can get some good value. It also works especially well for Eldritch Knights, because they don't have many great level 2 spell options, because their spellcasting modifier is so low. So you can have a concentration spell that gives you some concentration related buffs, such as the Strange Conduit Ring, and you can buff up your weapon, hopefully get a lot of attacks off, 3 per turn, 6 with Action Surge, more with Haste, and you can get some good value out of it. The issue, and the reason this is so low, is first, it's a concentration spell, which gives it some nice interactions with items, but makes it really hard to cast. A wizard really never wants to cast this as a buffing spell because they're not willing to keep up the concentration for a long time. And to get value, you really need to keep the spell up for a long time. So the concentration really holds it back. And on top of that, if you don't make many attacks, you're going to get really low value. 1 damage per attack is slow. It really does not add up quickly. It will add up, but if you lose your concentration, you're shit out of luck. It also gives a bonus to hit, which I didn't mention yet, and that is useful. But again, like the damage, it's not going to be very valuable unless you attack many, many times. Next up, number 26, and we're going to have a big streak of this color, we have Enhance Ability. Enhance Ability, very simply, makes your ability checks easier. This is nice. It's a good quality of life spell, and it's also specifically very good for transmutation wizards, because they make medicine checks to double alchemy. That is very good. You can get some strong potions, potions of speed, for example, using this, and that can be very valuable. The reason I don't like this spell is that ability checks are already really easy. You have Guidance, which is a cantrip, and you have Inspiration, and already you're going to be passing most of your important dialogue checks. so you don't really need this spell. On top of that, there's pretty much no combat use for it. It can help you shove better, technically, or resist shoving, but you very rarely make ability checks mid-combat, so this doesn't really help you at some of the most dangerous points in the game. Next up, we have another skill check related spell with Pass Without Trace at number 25. Pass Without Trace gives you a plus 10 bonus to your stealth. That's a lot, but stealth is near useless. It very, very rarely comes up in the game, only when you're sneaking through lightly obscured areas, and one other case that we'll talk about later. This is, like I said, a massive bonus, which is a big strength. Plus 10 is the best you can get from a spell. And this really comes up when you're building some stealth builds. Stealth archers specifically come to mind with greater invisibility, and you can use Pass Without Trace to really buff them up. That is the only case where this spell is good, and that is a very specific build, and it's also not the key part of that build. Greater invisibility is the key. So Pass Without Trace, even though it is a nice buff, I don't give it much credit because it's not what makes the build tick. So that's why I've got it in D tier, despite the massive bonus and strong build potential. Next up, we have Blur. Blur gives enemies disadvantage on attack rolls against the caster. This pairs very well with high AC because enemies that are unlikely to hit, who will hit very rarely. If they're only hitting you on, say, a 19 or 20 on the die, rolling that with disadvantage is incredibly hard. It also has the benefit of influencing AI. Enemies will attack you less if they think they can't hit you. So you can cast Blur to keep people safe without actually having them roll anything against you because they won't hit you as often. The reason I don't love this spell, it's a good buff, but it's not great. Giving enemies disadvantage is solid, but I don't think it's really that important. It's never going to reduce enemies' chances to hit more than 25%, and because of that, it's really only important in the very extreme cases where you have high AC, and even then, there are other ways to give enemies disadvantage. For one, you can just use the Cloak of Displacement to get the Blur effect. You don't need to cast the spell to get the effect, and the Cloak really holds the spell back from being good. Shield also exists as a level 1 spell that is a reaction to give plus 5 AC to dodge attacks. So it's very hard to find times where casting the spell Blur is the right move. Next up, we have a similarly AC related spell of Mirror Image. Mirror Image grants you 3 illusory duplicates, and each one grants you plus 3 AC. Now, plus 9 AC is a massive bonus. That is huge, and it's really going to save you, and it's going to keep you protected while it's up. It also, like Blur, influences the enemy AI. If the enemy thinks they can't hit you, they won't try. So even though you might only have protection for a few attacks, they might not bother hitting you in the first place, and that can be very powerful. The issue with this spell is that when it gets down to it, plus 3 AC is only decent. Plus 6 is also good, but at the end of the day, you only dodge 3 attacks with it, right? You get plus 9 for 1 miss, you get plus 6 for 2 misses, and plus 3 for 3 misses. That's only 3 attacks, and in the late game, that could happen from one enemy, and it's not even attacks that necessarily would have hit you. An enemy could roll a nat 1, and, well, you lose your mirror image. Next up, we are moving on to the C tier spells. C tier spells, these are spells that are maybe decent filler options. They apply to only a few encounters, or they're good, but they're outclassed. These spells in general are going to be weak for some reason or another, but there might be times in a playthrough where you do seriously consider casting them, or you might cast them somewhat often, but you have middling expectations when you do. First up in C tier is Blindness. Blindness is a debuff spell that you cast on enemies, and it gives them the blind condition. This is a decent debuff, well, probably better than decent. It gives enemies disadvantage on attack rolls, it gives you advantage on attack rolls, and their range is cut down to 10 feet. This is also uniquely a debuff spell that doesn't require your concentration. This is very solid. Most debuff spells, the really strong ones especially, do. So having an option where you don't need to give up your concentration to cast it is nice to have. It also upcasts well. I like when the debuff spells allow you to hit an additional target per spell level. You can hit many people in an encounter with it. There are a couple key issues with blindness, though, that hold it back and keep it in C tier. For one, it's a con save, and like I said earlier, con saves are a very weak save type. Many enemies are going to resist it very well, and it's not going to be very reliable. But the bigger issue is that this spell is just outclassed. You can blind enemies with no save involved using darkness, using fog cloud, and those are just free, right? You don't need to make them roll a save. You cast your level 2 spell of darkness or your level 1 spell of fog cloud, and they're blinded. On top of that, if you're looking at single target crowd control spells, I mean, we're going to talk about Crown of Madness and Hold Person later, which just straight up outclass it. The blind condition is nice, but as a single target debuff, it's not good enough. Next up at number 21, we have Calm Emotions. Calm Emotions is a unique one in that in most fights, it's not going to do anything. It's going to be useless. But in a few fights, it will completely solve the fight. The Harpy fight, for example, if you cast Calm Emotions on your party, they cannot be charmed by the Harpies. And you just solve the whole gimmick of that fight, and it becomes way easier. There are also a few fights where enemies will try to fear you. And if you cast this on your party, you entirely negate that effect, and you make those fights much easier. The issue with it, and the reason it's still low tiered, is that this is incredibly situational. I think this spell is a must cast for a couple fights, but in most fights, it's going to be useless. It's also a concentration spell, which is a cost. It doesn't stop you from wanting to cast it in those fights, but it does make it a bit weaker when you do. Next up, we have the first summon of the video. We have Flaming Sphere. Flaming Sphere is a summon that creates a flaming sphere. And the sphere is big and tanky. It has a fairly high AC, a lot of resistances, and I believe 20 health, which is pretty good at level 3 when you first unlock it. It also leaves fire in its wake. You can just roll it around and leave fire around, and this will help get rid of hazards such as webs, and it will also deal a bit of damage and mess with the enemy AI as they try to avoid it. This spell is just generally chaotic, right? You drop it on the ground, it's this big orb, enemies will need to try to stay out of its aura, they'll try to avoid the fire it leaves, you can use it to block enemies' movement, so it really adds some chaos to the battlefield and makes it more in your favor by messing with how the enemies can act. It also does decent damage. It's not great, but it does do some damage. The issue with this summon, and why I think the spell is bad, despite this Flaming Sphere itself being good, is that this is a concentration spell, and it costs you an action. We're going to talk about Spiritual Weapon later, and that one's a bonus action, and it doesn't cost concentration. But this one is really hard to use because of this cost. You can put down your Flaming Sphere, and the enemies could just never target it, hit your spellcaster once, and you lose it. That feels really bad, and the action cost makes it hard to justify using this over other leveled spells. Along similar lines, it just feels clunky to use. Part of that is because of the concentration and sometimes just losing it, but it's big, it doesn't have great movement, it doesn't jump very far, so it can feel clunky to use sometimes and a little difficult. All right, next up, we have number 19, Web. Web creates an area on the ground of web, which is mainly difficult terrain. Enemies need double move speed to move across it, and it can also completely remove their movement by enwebbing them. And enwebbing enemies will also give you advantage on attack rolls against them. The issue with this spell, and why, even though I think difficult terrain and the ability to completely remove movement is very good, is it doesn't really work. If an enemy is enwebbed, and then they they fail their saving throw at the beginning of their next turn, they don't stay enwebbed, they just break out anyways. So in reality, the removing enemy movement part doesn't work very well. It is also flammable. So if you cast the web anywhere near a candle, which can be sneaky sometimes, you're just wasting your spell. And that really feels bad. If there's any fire damage around, you could just lose it. It's pretty rough. It's also got a fairly small radius of only 13 feet. This isn't terrible, but if we compare to some of the other area spells, like we're going to talk about Spike Growth later, it feels much harder to use, and it's harder to cover a good area with it. And I don't even have mentioned here, it's also concentration, which along with the flammability makes it even harder to keep up. Next up, we have number 18, Prayer of Healing, which holds the title of being the most efficient healing spell in Baldur's Gate 3. It comes with a catch. It is only used out of combat. So it heals 2d8 plus your wisdom to everyone within range, so you can use it on your full party and heal them a lot. You can't use it in combat, so it doesn't really come up too often unless you limit long rests. If you don't limit long rests, then whenever you might cast Prayer of Healing, you could probably just long rest instead, and you never need to cast this spell. But if you do care, or you might just not be ready yet, you can use this to get a ton of healing. You're getting at least 8d8 plus your wisdom times 4, and if you have summons, you're getting even more value out of it. So when I play, it can really save me a couple encounters, get me an extra bit of the way there before I take a long rest, and it's just good healing, very efficient. Next up, we have number 17, Enlarge Reduce. Enlarge Reduce, well, for one, it's a 2-in-1 spell. You get 2 uses out of it. Neither are particularly great, but it's always good to have options. One way to use this is as a damage buffing spell, giving your allies plus 1d4 to their weapon damage. This is an okay damage buff. It's not great, but 1d4, if you do a lot of attacks, can add up, and it can crit to double. As a debuff, reducing enemies' damage by 1d4 is not very good. That's really nothing. But it also makes enemies easier to shove or throw by reducing their weight, making them smaller, and giving them disadvantage on strength checks. This is very nice because it can open up more opportunities for you to one-shot kill enemies by shoving them or throwing them. This is definitely very useful. Again, we talked about it with Gust of Wind, which was quite low rated, but the ability to instantly kill enemies is always worth looking at. The main downside is, like I pointed out, neither effect is particularly powerful. It's nice, it's good to have. I like casting Enlarge for the flavor. It's cool to see, the big barbarian, or even you can use it on ranged characters too with hand crossbows. And it's very cool, but it's not particularly strong. Next up, we have number 16, Shatter. Shatter is a damaging spell that does 3d8 thunder damage with a decent AoE. It does decent damage, and it has thunder damage, which is a good damage type. This spell is the epitome of a filler spell. It doesn't have great damage, its secondary effects aren't particularly good, but it has a decent sized AoE, it does enough damage, and it does a good damage type that I'll cast this sometimes. It doesn't really compete with Cloud of Daggers or Moonbeam or Scorching Ray, which we'll see later on, but there are times where I'm just like, okay, I need to do a little bit of damage to a big group of enemies, let me use Shatter. The downside, like I was saying, the damage is outclassed. It's decent, 3d8 is decent for an AoE spell, but it's not going to be killing anyone, it's not going to be one-shotting anyone, and it just really doesn't hold up to some of the strongest options. And as a damaging spell, you really need to compare well, because it is kind of a scenario where if you ain't first, you're last. Next up, we have number 15, Invisibility. Invisibility, one of the main uses, is for exploration. This makes getting into forbidden areas very easy. It makes sneaking around enemies very easy. It makes the out-of-combat stuff just in general very easy. And when you're done exploring and you're ready to fight, invisibility makes surprising very easy. You can use this spell to very safely and reliably get surprise rounds, which are incredibly valuable, and you should try to get whenever you can. On top of that, you can use this mid-combat as an escape option. You can cast invisibility on yourself or an ally and then run away, and enemies probably won't be able to find you, and you're going to be very safe and able to get away. This seems like a solid effect. Surprise rounds are very important to get, and having an emergency escape is valuable, but the reason this is not very highly rated is that, for one, it's expensive. You can get surprise rounds for free in many cases, and there are other emergency escape options that are either a lower tier spell slot or maybe not full action. And on top of that, you can get invisibility from a couple different places, from items, for example, rings. So it is pretty costly to use a spell slot on it. And on top of that, it's just not the best at what it does. It's good. It's good for surprising, it's good for exploration, and it's good for emergency escape, but there are other spells, other effects that can do it. Alright, that's all we've got for the C tier spells. We're moving on to B tier. B tier spells are spells that are just generally good to cast and or prepare. We're getting into good territory. First up, at number 14, we have Crown of Madness. Crown of Madness is a single target AoE spell, and it has one great thing going for it, in that when you successfully use Crown of Madness, not only do you get rid of an enemy's action, you actually turn it against them. You get to take away the enemy's action from hitting you, and instead they're going to hit enemies, and it basically doubles as both a CC spell on the person you cast it on, and a damage spell on the person they attack. This is very high upside, and it's very satisfying when it works. But the issue is that the spell is fairly unreliable. There are times where you would expect that the enemy will hit a different enemy, but they actually target someone in your party, and that can be very frustrating and dissuade you from casting the spell. It also, unfortunately, only targets humanoids. This is a pretty big restriction. There are humanoids throughout the whole game that are scary. You're going to fight Gith throughout, and there are bosses in every act. But humanoid casting only is a big restriction. And on top of that, the spell only lasts for up to 3 turns. Hopefully, that is enough to win an encounter, but there are times where you'll just naturally lose your Crown of Madness due to time. Next up, in rank 13, we have Heat Metal. Heat Metal, we're going to start with the weaknesses first. Heat Metal has pretty weak damage. 2d8 for a level 2 spell is rough. It also has a weak save type. It is not ideal. I believe it is Dexterity, which is good, but not great. Hold on. Let me take that back. Dexterity saves are not good, actually. They're one of the weaker ones, and this is a con save, I believe, which, as we said before, is one of the weakest. And on top of that, weak damage, weak save type, it's also a concentration spell. So, on the surface, this spell looks awful, right? It's a damaging spell that does low damage, is unreliable because of the save type, and it costs your concentration. So how can this be good? Well, for one, Heat Metal disarms enemies. Disarming martial enemies is very powerful. It effectively reduces their damage entirely. Going from a weapon to unarmed attacks makes them much less likely to hit, and they will deal almost no damage. So disarming enemies is very powerful, and you can think of this spell as actually a debuffing spell that does some damage. On top of that, if you fail, if the enemy holds onto their weapon, you can recast this as a bonus action. So it is a disarming, debuffing spell, and if you have enough time, it's going to work. You're going to get to use it multiple times, and the enemy will get disarmed. It's not a save or suck spell like most of the debuffs. You get multiple tries, and every time you try, you also get a bonus amount of damage, which is very nice. On top of that, passing the save does not have the damage. So even though you might think, oh, this is a weak save type and low damage spell, most of the time they're going to have it and only take a little bit of damage. This will do a good amount of damage because it's never going to get halved. 2d8 with no way to cut it in half is not bad, especially as a bonus action. All right, let's move on to number 12, and I know I'm going to get some flack for this one, but next up I have Misty Step. Misty Step is a strong repositioning spell. It is a bonus action that gives you a lot of movement in 60 feet. It is a great safety option when you're in trouble. Being able to get out very quickly for just a bonus action for 60 move speed is really powerful, and it will keep you safe. Here's why I don't like this spell that much, though. I've still rated it a high B tier, but I don't love this spell for a couple main reasons. One, it's available from equipment. You can get this on boots, on an amulet, and there are a few free ways to get it that don't require a spell slot. And ideally, when I'm playing the game, I'm not going to be in many terrible scenarios where I need a good escape more than once per long rest. So having it just on the equipment is enough. And the other thing, I'm just against using a spell slot for movement. I think at the end of the day, using a bonus action to move 60 feet is incredible. But it feels really bad to me to use one of my spell slots, which I think are very valuable. We're going to see some great effects you can get out of your spell slot just to move more. It doesn't feel like a good value proposition to me. And on top of that, there are other options to do what Misty Step does. We already talked about invisibility as an escape option. Enhanced Leap exists as a way to buff up your jump to give you bonus actions every turn that move you a lot. Misty Step is not a very unique spell. It is good when you use it, and I would recommend that you prep this spell, but I don't cast it often. I don't like using my spell slot on it, so I don't have it in S tier like I think many people would. All right, we've made it up to A tier. These are spells that are strong. They're just strong general options, or sometimes they are encounter winning. This tier is very small. I don't have many spells in here, so it's going to move quick. At number 11, I have Silence. Silence is a spell where you cast it, and it creates an orb, and inside it, everybody is silenced. There is no save required, so this is a guaranteed debuff in a large AoE. It is completely neutering to spellcasters. When you're in the silence bubble, you can't cast spells. There are a handful you can cast, like Ice Knife and Hypnotic Pattern, but there are very, very few, and most NPCs don't have many spell choices. They just have a few that they are pre-selected to have, so they can't do anything when they're silenced. So this spell will completely shut down some of the stronger enemies in the game by removing all their spell casting. It also has the added effect of giving thunder immunity, and one of the main reasons you need to know this is so you don't cast Shatter on silenced enemies, but you can also use this to your advantage. You can cast this on your own party in encounters that have a lot of thunder damage to protect them. Two encounters that come to mind are Grim and Gortash. There is also the added benefit of this being a ritual spell. So if you're using this for any out-of-combat cheese, you can use it for free. And if you pre-cast it, it also costs no spell slot, so you can cast it where you know enemies will be beforehand. There are some weaknesses to this. In the first key one, and it's really major, there aren't as many spellcasters in the game as you'd think. When you're playing Baldur's Gate, a D&D system, you'd think, wow, there's probably going to be so many mages in the game. But there's actually not that many in Baldur's Gate 3. A lot of enemies will have spell-like abilities, but not spells themselves. And spellcasters are actually pretty rare to come by. When they do come up, they're strong, they're scary. Some of them will use level 6 spells, and they will try to mess you up. So having silence on hand to stop them is great. On top of that, another key issue is that this spell doesn't solo win fights. If you just cast silence on a spellcaster and do nothing else, they're going to walk out of it, and they're going to cast their spell, and you're going to do nothing with your spell. So you need some support, whether it be with sentinel characters, with other spells, something. You need to keep enemies within the silence orb. It just cannot work on its own. But when it does work, it's really strong. All right, next up, we have Spiritual Weapon. When I did my report card on this, many people really did not like this spell, but I am a big fan. I think the first key thing I like about it is that this summon is very tanky. It is 20 HP and it resists all damage. So it's really got 40 HP. It's able to tank a lot of hits in the early game. You learn this at level 3, and those encounters cannot deal with a spiritual weapon, and at that point in the game, it's even going to be doing a lot of damage. This also casts as a bonus action, which is very, very nice. Clerics have a lot of strong things they can do, so having this as a bonus action option is very nice. So they don't need to struggle to find a place to cast it. You can just cast it really whenever you want. The big downside of this spell, and the reason so many people don't like it, it has very low move speed. It has only 20 move speed. So there are times where, and I've had this happen, you just cast your spiritual weapon, enemies run away, and you can't catch up. And you're like, oh my god, I just wasted my spell slot. But if you play around this, there are going to be enemies that target this, and it will tank some damage, and you will get value out of it. But it does feel bad to use sometimes because of the move speed. On top of the move speed, it rolls its own initiative, which is just another piece that makes it a little more clunky, so you don't get to group it with your party usually. All right, we're on to S tier. These spells are the creme de la creme. They are top tier general options, build defining, or encounter winning. These spells are very strong. First up, we have at number 9, Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray is, at face value, already just a high damage spell. It has very high average damage for a level 2 spell. It handily outperforms Shatter and Melf's Acid Arrow, and it's competitive with Cloud of Daggers and Moonbeam. 66 is a lot of damage at level 2 and is 21 on average. On top of that, it's more consistent because it shoots multiple beams. This means that instead of relying all on one attack roll, you make 3, and sometimes you'll hit 2 and miss 1, or if you're unlucky, you might miss 2, but you'll still hit 1 and get some damage out. And along the multiple beam lines, it has great item synergy. If you have items such as the Callous Glow Ring, the Hat of Fire Acuity, they're going to apply on every beam, and that is insanely powerful. As just a damage option, this is a good spell, but it's not S tier. Having a high average damage, reliable, damaging spell is good. But what brings this over the edge is that you can abuse so many of the strong items in Baldur's Gate 3. You can stack Damage Riders and turn this into a nuke. You can stack Arcane Acuity and turn every other spell into an unmissable nuke. It is very, very powerful. As one downside, this is fire damage, which makes it work with the Hat of Fire Acuity, but also means it is fairly widely resisted. There are a lot of fiends in the game. Surprisingly, a lot of undead are resistant to fire, so it does hold it back a little bit as a general damage option, but it is still very strong with items. Next up, at number 8, we have Hold Person. Hold Person is an incredible crowd control spell. It completely nullifies the enemy's action economy. They cannot move, they cannot act, they can't react, they can't do anything. That is exactly what I want from a crowd control spell. It completely shuts down the target. On top of that, it guarantees crits against the target, so it functions also kind of like a damaging spell. You crowd control them, they can't do anything, and then they also take way more damage. You can pair this with crit synergy items, or you can just use it to pump out a bunch of damage with your marshals. On top of that, by guaranteeing crits, you lose any chance of missing. So, alongside just bumping up how much damage you do, you're always going to do damage when you target someone hit by Hold Person. This is a really strong spell, and it also upcasts well. An additional target per spell slot level is very strong. You can hold entire encounters down using this spell and pretty much guarantee victory. It is very strong. The reason this spell is not at the very top of S tier is that it only targets humanoids. We talked about it a bit with Crown of Madness. There are humanoids all throughout the game, and it is valuable to target them, but a lot of the strongest bosses you can't hit with Hold Person, and it is not very versatile because of that. You can only use it in specific encounters. Next up, we're moving on to number 7, Moonbeam. Moonbeam is a very high damage spell. 2d10, activating twice is insane. It is 4d10 damage for a level 2 spell slot. And it can be recast. So you can deal 4d10 every single turn by plopping it on an enemy, and then they take the damage at the start of their turn. And you also don't have to recast it. You can then use other damaging sources and still deal 2d10 each turn. You can hit someone into it. So it does a ton of damage whether or not you recast, and it's really the highest average damage option at level 2, unaccounting for saving throws. It also deals radiant damage. Radiant damage is a premier damage type. It is very good. Unfortunately, there is kind of a bug where it doesn't apply some of the items that would apply on radiant damage, but it also has a few upsides. So it isn't as powerful as other radiant damage spells would be, but it is just a strong damage type that's not very widely resisted. There are 2 downsides I have here. One is that it is a con save. So even though this has the highest average damage of a level 2 spell, in practicality, it's going to be cut down quite a bit because enemies will pass their con save and take half damage. And the other issue is that it has a tiny AoE. Now, this spell would still be good if it was only a single target spell because the average damage is just so high. But as an AoE spell, you're really only going to be hitting 1 or 2. You're going to be really lucky to hit 3 people with this. So it doesn't cover a large area. Next up, we have another druid option with Spike Growth at number 6. Spike Growth does insane damage. It does 2d4 piercing for every 5 feet moved on top of the growth. The growth has a 20-foot radius, which means it has a 40 feet diameter, so enemies will take 2d4 damage 8 times, give or take 1 or 2 depending on their line. 8 times 2d4 is 16d4, which is a lot of damage. It might not sound like a lot, but that is 40 average damage for a level 2 spell. That is insane. That is a ton of damage. It will wipe any early game encounter that you can use it in. It also has a huge AoE, so you can cast it on an area, and it's going to be very hard for enemies to avoid. And the thing about this damage is there are no rolls required. It just does that damage, and it's very consistent because it's many small dice. So it's going to deal around 40 damage to any enemy who walks entirely through it. And on top of that, I don't even have listed here, enemies have halved move speed when they're in the spike growth because it is difficult terrain. So this is a huge AoE spell that does insane damage over time and hampers enemy movement. It is so good. So how is this not one of the top, 3 spells? Well, there are a couple things I have listed here. One, it's fairly arena dependent. You need to find an area where you can cast this into a choke point to get max value out of it to force enemies to walk through it. Sometimes you just can't find a good place for it, and it's not going to be able to help you in that encounter like it should. There's also the fact that enemies have movement abilities. Every enemy has jump, although I find that often they don't use it around spike growth. I think that's going to change by player. You might find that it happens all the time, but all enemies have jump, and then some will have things like Shadow Step or Misty Step or some other movement ability that lets them completely evade spike growth. Next up, as the 5th best level 2 spell in Baldur's Gate 3, we have the incredible buffing spell Warding Bond. Warding Bond is a spell that grants the target resistance to all damage. This is insane. That is a great defensive buff, and it doesn't come without penalty, but we'll talk about that later. Resistance to all damage is great. On top of that, it stacks with flat damage reduction very well. So you could find a case where normally you would take, say, 10 damage, Warding Bond will cut it in half, and then the flat damage reduction applies after cutting it in half. So you can bring that down to, say, 2. If you're hit by 10 damage, Warding Bond reduces it in half, and if it's physical damage, Heavy Armor Master, for example, could reduce it by 3 down to 2. This will increase the number of attacks you can take before you go down tremendously. The enemies would need 5 attacks to deal the same amount of damage that the one attack at 10 would have normally done. This is incredible. It is very, very strong. On top of that, Warding Bond can be used to enable the whole party. You can have one caster cast it on all 3 people. And then if they have damage reduction, they're going to be taking very little damage from the redirection, and they're going to enable everybody. The way this spell works is that it will reflect any damage dealt to the target onto the caster. So inherently, it puts the caster in danger. They're going to have trouble keeping concentration, and they're going to take a good amount of damage. But if you build around this, and you really should, it is strong when you don't, but it's strongest when you do. If you build around this, you're going to be able to reduce damage tremendously. If you have damage reduction on both the caster and the recipient of Warding Bond, you're going to be able to bring damage onto the caster down to almost nothing, and damage onto the recipient down a lot. This is such an enabler. It enables many other builds that might normally be strong but not OP, or that might be weak, to become very strong. It is so good. I can't say too much about it. We're already an hour in, but I am a big fan of the spell. I think when your clerics build around this and get a lot of flat damage reduction, it is one of the strongest in the game. But I do have a couple other spells above it because this one does require a bit to play around it. Next up, we have another cleric buffing spell. At number 4, we have Aid. Aid simply gives your party plus 5 max HP. This might not sound 4th best spell worthy, but it actually really is. Because for one, plus 5 max HP is much better than healing. Increasing your max HP does a couple of things differently. For one, it lowers or increases the threshold that an enemy needs to hit to knock you down. Say you were at 20 HP before Aid, and you're at 25 after. If an enemy deals 22 damage on their turn, before Aid, you would have gotten knocked down, you would have lost your action, your party would have needed to heal you, it would have been a catastrophic event. After Aid, it's not that bad. You're still up, you get your action, you can try to get to safety, or you can kill the enemy who is threatening you. Aid, bringing up that threshold, is very important, and it's very good. You can also upcast this very well to get more than plus 5 max HP. Plus 5 might not sound like a lot, but plus 20, that does sound like a lot. And it has unlimited targets. So you can cast it on your whole party, and if you just have your 4 party members, and you cast this upcasted to plus 20 HP, that's 80 HP off this spell. That should sound like a lot to you, and it is. That is very, very powerful. But on top of that, this works on summons. If you summon, say, 3 targets, I don't know, let's say 4. You use Danse Macabre from the Vatiate Codex, and you have 4 ghouls with you. All those ghouls now also get the plus 20 HP, and your spell has given your party 160 HP. That is a massive amount. And whenever you short rest, you heal for half of your max HP, so you've gained an extra 10 healing per short rest. So if you short rest twice, and you can do that more if you have bards, by the way, if you short rest twice with 4 summons, Aid is giving you 160 max HP and 160 healing. That is insane. That is insane value from your spell. It is very powerful, and whenever I have a cleric, I like to use Aid as one of my higher level spell slots every adventuring day. I'll also note on the summons track, this works on undead and constructs. You normally cannot heal that type of summon, so if you summon any zombies, skeletons, whatever, when they take damage, and you can't heal them with your prayer of healing, but you can, with Aid, increase their max HP. One downside I'll list and this is related to max HP not being healing. This doesn't apply on heal items such as the Whispering Promise, which is annoying. It means you can't really use this mid-combat as a good option, but if you're casting this at the beginning of an adventuring day, that doesn't really matter. The other downside I have listed, and I talked about it a bit, you really need to upcast this to be at the top of S tier. It's still good, just 5 max HP. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that is still good and would be a highly rated spell. But the reason this is top of S tier, the 4th best level 2 spell, is because when you upcast it, the amount feels very high. Up next, at number 3, the bronze medal goes to Shadowblade. This is a very strong spell. I bet many of you were expecting it to be number 1. And for one, the big reason this is so good, Shadowblade just out-damages all weapons. It summons a Shadowblade in your hand that deals 2d8 psychic damage. Your standard weapons aren't going to be doing more than 2d6, and in the early game, they won't have great enchantments. So when you cast this at base level, it's going to be pretty much the strongest weapon you have access to. And in the later game, this thing can upcast to do 3d8 or 4d8 damage, so it will even outperform the late game legendary items that should be the creme de la creme of weapons. This also lasts all day. This is insane. You can get a weapon that deals more damage than any possible equipment you could find, and you just need to spend your spell slot at the beginning of the day, and you have it all day. It's also going to give you free advantage on a lot of attacks because it has advantage against targets in lightly or heavily obscured areas. In Act 2, this is going to be everywhere, and at every point in the game, there are going to be enemies just in lightly obscured areas. They're not very hard to find. And on top of that, it also deals psychic damage. The damage type doesn't really matter. This would be a top tier spell either way, but psychic damage is fairly rarely resisted, or at least it's resisted by enemies who are unique, right? Your typical enemies that are resistant to the common resistances are not going to resist psychic damage, so Shadowblade is going to be good against them, and you can double it with the Resonant Stone to make an incredibly OP build. The reason I have this at number 3, and it's a really tough one, we're looking at the best spells out there, they're all going to have very few weaknesses. Shadowblade is really only applicable to a few subclasses, so this is a great weapon to get, but your standard wizard, warlock, sorcerer, whatever class gets it, doesn't care. Even if you have access to one of the best weapons in the game, you're a spellcaster, so it doesn't really matter. But, of course, there are Hexblades, there are just Pact the Blade Warlocks, there are Blade Singers, and they make incredible use of this spell. They make it incredibly powerful. There are also, of course, Arcane Tricksters and Eldritch Knights, who are martial classes who now have access to a strong weapon. All right, number 2, we have the Silver Medalist here. I have the second best level 2 spell in Baldur's Gate 3 as Cloud of Daggers. I love this spell. Cloud of Daggers deals, for one, insane damage. 4d4 doesn't sound like a lot because it's two fairly low numbers, right? 4 and 4, but it's actually insane. Cloud of Daggers will deal damage when you place it and at the start of enemies' turns. So it's actually 8d4. And 8d4 still might not sound like a lot, but it's 20 average damage, which is very good. It's beat barely by Scorching Ray and Moonbeam, but it's near the highest for level 2 spells, and it upcasts very well. Adding 2d4 twice, because it procs twice, adds 10 average damage every time you upcast. So this has very high damage, but what sets it apart from Moonbeam and Scorching Ray, which have higher average damage and are lower than this? Well, for one, unlike Moonbeam, Cloud of Daggers actually has a decent AoE. It's not the largest, but you're going to be able to catch 2, maybe even 3 people with it whenever you cast it. So the damage is going to apply to many people, and more importantly, there's no rolls required. There's no saving throw associated with Cloud of Daggers. Enemies cannot have the damage they take. They are going to take 4d4, which is a consistent amount, it's very tight around the average, every time. It's very reliable. It's got a good AoE. You can just leave it on the ground and enemies might walk through it. You can shove them into it. It does insane damage. It's incredibly consistent. It has good AoE. This is one of the best damaging spells in the game. It's going to get continued use throughout the game, and it's going to outright win you encounters in the early game. It is really, really powerful. The one downside I have listed here, it doesn't scale with items. The way it works, it won't apply things like the Callous Glow Ring or any conditions that apply on items. This is annoying, especially in the late game once you have a big build online, but in the early game, this doesn't really matter. You don't have many great item choices anyways, and this is still going to be a great option in the late game, even without those added effects. And part of the reason it doesn't scale well with items is because there are no rolls required. A lot of the strongest items really bump up your save DC or your attack roll, while this one just avoids that mechanic entirely. It just deals its damage, it deals its very high damage, no roll required. Next up, we're on to the number 1 best level 2 spell in Baldur's Gate 3. I have Darkness. Darkness is it's an insane spell. For one, it gives you complete protection. If you cast Darkness and play around it, it completely nullifies enemy ranged attacks. Enemies simply cannot cast ranged spells or use ranged attacks into the Darkness Cloud or through it. So it completely nullifies pretty much 2 classes of enemies, ranged marshals and spellcasters, because they can't use their spells through darkness. And it also protects you from melees fairly well because it blinds enemies. Anyone who is in the Darkness Cloud is blinded, with no save required. So you get complete protection from ranged enemies. Melee enemies, if they are in the Darkness Cloud, are blinded with no save. No one can hit you. This is one of the strongest defensive spells in the game. It is insane. It is so insane that it breaks the enemy AI. When you cast Darkness, often they don't know what to do. They might just stand outside of it and do nothing. Sometimes they will venture into the Darkness Cloud, but if you build around it, then you're going to be dodging a lot of attacks because, well, melee enemies, not champions, sorry, will have disadvantage. And if you have blind immunity, that won't be canceled out by them getting advantage. So it's going to be very hard for enemies to hit you. The ranged characters can't do anything. It is just really strong. And another reason, and this is really the big one why I have it at number 1, there are a ton of very, very strong level 2 spells, but really they're about, maybe they will hit a lot of enemies, or there'll be a really strong buff for, the caster. But this spell, it can be really strong for the whole party. You don't need to cast this and have like one insane build. You can pretty easily build your whole party around this one spell, and everyone will benefit from it. If you're willing to commit a couple levels of Warlock or a ring slot or a helmet slot, your entire party is going to be able to abuse darkness to its fullest. They'll be completely protected from ranged enemies, completely protected from spellcasters, and fairly strongly protected from melee enemies. It is insane. I do have one downside listed here. You do need to build around this. I don't think it's very hard. 2 levels of Warlock can be annoying for some builds, but it is very doable, especially for spellcasters. It is also possible to get blind immunity from the Eversight Ring, which is just a ring slot and a couple different helmets. So getting blind immunity and being able to abuse darkness is not hard. And when you can, your entire party will be insane. The game's going to become really easy. It also might become very boring, I'll admit, and that might be enough to bring it down from number 1 for some people, but it breaks the game. It is insanely strong. It literally breaks the AI. This is, in my opinion, the number 1 level 2 spell. All right, we're at the end here. This is a long video. Sorry if I got a bit rambly. It's been a long video. At the end, I've got a completed tier list here with every spell in it. Yeah, take a look if you'd like. This is just a recap of everything we've talked about. I talked about all of these spells at much greater lengths in their own videos in my report card series, so if you'd like to check those out, feel free. And yeah, that's all I've got for today. Thank you for sticking with me with this one. I know it's much longer than my typical video, so I do appreciate it. Let me know what you think in the comments. What spell do you think is the actual number one level 2 spell? Am I tripping with putting Darkness there? Is Shadowblade really that OP? Am I overrating Aid? What do you think? And yeah, hope you all have a good one.